This Week in Startups is brought to you by Citrix GoToMeeting. Meeting is believing. Visit GoToMeeting.com. Click the Try It Free button and sign up for a 30-day trial. And Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com. Enter offer code TWiST at checkout to get 10% off. Squarespace. Build it beautiful.
Today on the show is Larry Lessig, Harvard Law professor, political activist, and co-founder of Creative Commons, who talks to Jason about his recently announced crowdfunded exploratory presidential campaign and the bold plan for his referendum presidency.
That's what it's all about, man. They said money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah. Money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Startups, a special bonus edition. We didn't know this was going to happen, but my pal Larry Lessig decided he's going to run for president, and I saw this. When did you decide you're going to run for president, Larry?
So we announced it on the 11th of August.
Okay. Now, you're running for president, but I've read the headlines. I don't know exactly what your platform is or why you're doing it, but you're going to pass one law, and then you're going to do what? Explain to us what's going on.
All right, so the basic idea is I've announced if we crowdfund $1 million by Labor Day, I will run. And I will run to be what I've called a referendum president. So the background of this is we have a deeply corrupted political system.
No joke.
No
joke.
Real. Everybody, Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Independents, everybody believes this system is corrupted.
For sure. And
there's no way the politicians are going to fix it. You know, they can talk about it, that they're not going to fix it. And so all of these great promises candidates are making when they run for president, you know, to deal with climate change finally, to deal with student debt, all these things cannot happen until we address this fundamental corruption. Now, if we were in California, you could propose a referendum to deal with this. You could get around the politicians through a referendum.
Right.
But we don't have a referendum at the federal level.
Right.
So my idea is, why don't we hack a referendum into the federal Constitution? So I am the referendum. So I have said, I'm going to run. I'm going to pass one law. The law will deal with this fundamental corruption, this fundamental corrupted inequality that's in our system. And then I'll step aside and my vice president will become president.
Got it.
So the idea is I can have a mandate powerful enough to tell those politicians
right.
that they need to do what the people say. And once they've done it, then I'll go home.
Okay. Has this ever been done in the history of politics before?
Why would I do something that's ever been done before?
Exactly.
So
right.
totally
You're always
boring.
doing things that are unique. The only thing I can remember that's even close to this was Howard Stern was going to run for governor as a joke and then cede control to some libertarian.
Right, right.
And he was just using his celebrity to sort of make a spectacle of it.
I don't have Howard's celebrity.
Right. Well, you have you do have a celebrity amongst intellectuals and technologists who respect your work. Now, you've done a lot of great work defending people, creating Creative Commons, et cetera. So let's talk about the referendum process. We have referendums in California, but some people seem to think that this has run a little bit amok.
Yeah. I live in California.
Is it a good thing, a bad thing? How would you explain the pros and cons of a referendum-based system?
Yeah, it's a little contradictory because I lived in California for 9 years, and I think the referendum system in California has gone crazy. Right. You get these books delivered to you every election, 150 pages of this tiny little legal writing to explain to you what the referendum is. Nobody reads them, nobody understands it, and so I think it's out of control. So I'm not saying at the federal level we should have a referendum, but I am saying sometimes we need a way around a corrupted government. The framers of our Constitution actually thought about this. When they were proposing the Constitution, 2 days before it was published, they noticed that the only way to amend the Constitution was if Congress proposed an amendment.
Right.
And a guy named Mason stood up and says, what if Congress is the problem? And it was the first, kind of duh moment.
Right.
And they said, yeah, this is a real thing. So they created an opportunity to have what was called a convention to go around Congress. So states could call for Congress to call a convention. The convention then could propose amendments to the Constitution if Congress was the problem. Well, that's what we have right now. Congress is the problem. Deeply corrupted system.
Right.
Tiny, tiny fraction of the 1% funding campaigns. Those guys bending over backwards to keep this tiny, tiny fraction happy. In this election cycle, 130 families have given half the money that has gone into the Republican
130.
Yeah.
And when you say families, you mean like what? Like the
Waltons,
Yeah.
I mean, these big, incredibly rich families.
And they're giving this money because they're altruistic and they just want to see the country run more functionally.
Exactly right. Exactly
Yes.
right. But
But I mean, they're giving it because they want to have some level of control and power over these elected officials to do their bidding.
Yeah, I'm not so interested in picking on the people who give.
Right.
I'm interested in picking on the politicians who allow the system to survive.
Right.
Because what we know is that those politicians bend over back, they shapeshift.
Right.
To put themselves into the position where they know they can raise the money they need to raise from these people. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. And she went on to say, he was not an environmentalist. And the point is, these guys, as they spend 30 to 70% of their time raising money, learn what they need to say to get the money from the people they're raising money from.
I had this experience when I was in New York, and I'm not very involved in this political stuff, and I'm not a big fan of it for the reasons you point out. Somebody came up to me who was running for governor or something, and they said, I think it was Cuomo, and he said, hey, listen, I really am interested in what issues matter to you so we can, work on them. And I just thought, well, what if my issue is like everybody should have machine guns or something? Like, do you want to hear the issue before you, start backing it? So didn't we just go through campaign finance reform, and didn't we go through all this? And wasn't this supposed to be solved at some point? Educate me and the audience as to why it didn't happen the last time.
Yeah. So first, I don't think we should call it campaign finance reform.
Okay.
Just like I don't think we should call an alcoholic someone with a liquid intake problem, right? This is just too technical. It's much more fundamental. It's a deep inequality in our system, right? We are supposed to be a representative democracy. That means it's supposed to represent all of us equally. Your representative power is supposed to be equal to my representative power.
One man, one vote.
Right.
One human, one vote.
One human, one vote, right. But what this system does is it says to the 150 families at the front of the line, you guys matter first, and second, and third, and fourth, and maybe down at 100, the rest of the people begin to matter. So that's a deep inequality inside the system. And what it produces is a system that can be blocked by 1,000 different people, right? If you think about the number of people who give even just the maximum contribution allowed to one congressional candidate, $5,200. In this cycle, it'll be 54, but in the last cycle, it was 52. $5,200, there were 57,874 people who gave $5,200. Okay, that's 0.02% of America. Means those 0.02% of America have incredible power inside of our system relative to the rest of us.
Right.
That's a violation of the way our system works. Now,
what should the number be? Should the number be like 1 hour at the minimum wage or something? Is there some formula we can make? Like 10 hours of minimum wage equals the max? Because that's what I would do. I'd say, hey, listen, if you want to work a full, hard, long 10-hour day and put $75 towards a candidate, that's the max anybody can do.
I think everybody should be given a voucher. Just rebate your first $100 of taxes in the form of a voucher, like a
brilliant
Target card or a Starbucks card, and then you can use that to give to candidates who, right now we could do it to give to candidates who agree to fund their campaigns with small contributions and vouchers. That would radically change the way they raise money. They wouldn't be talking to the 130 families. They'd be talking to, trying to raise money for millions of people, and that would make it so they could be responsive to millions of people rather than responsive to this tiny fraction.
Do the politicians who are in office, do they prefer the system of having these 150 families and catering to them? Does that provide them with a better experience than what you're proposing and back to one human, one vote and a more level playing field?
They know how to win under the existing system.
Got it.
That's why they like it. But they are miserable under the existing system. It's not stable. I mean, it's changed dramatically in the past 20 years. 20 years ago, you had to raise money. You had to figure out how to fund your campaigns. But there was a difference between campaign time and governing time. There was a time when Congress was governing, and then there was a time when they were campaigning. And if you're lucky, governing time was a year and a half, and campaigning time was half a year, maybe a year if things are bad. Now it's perpetual campaigning time. Right. Now they're always racing off Capitol Hill down to these call centers to raise money. Their focus is constantly, how do they raise money? One of my friends, John Sarbanes, who has a really fantastic proposal for matching funds to deal with this problem, described to me that in his 4 terms in Congress, he had had lunch with a colleague 5 times. And I said, why? And he said, well, if you have time for lunch, you have time to raise money. And if you have time to raise money, that's what you're going to do. So the system has totally perverted the way Congress functions. It can't function anymore. And the only way we're going to fix that is if we change the way campaigns are funded.
Okay. One thing that strikes me in this proposal is that you have to find a number two who we're all comfortable with.
Yeah.
How do you find the number two?
Yeah, that's a really hard question because, ordinarily the nominee for president gets to pick his or her vice president.
Right.
Because you hope the vice president is never president, right? That's the assumption. But my vice president is going to be president. I hope after one day he or she is going to be president.
Yeah.
So I actually think that I shouldn't have as much power as a normal nominee would. And so I think the judgment should be a judgment made by the convention on the basis of, who excites the Democratic base powerfully enough and who's likely to help to make sure that we can win.
So you're going to run as a Democrat.
Yeah.
What does the Democratic Party think of this? Have they reached out to you and said, hey, don't make a spectacle of this, don't be the Donald Trump of our party? Not that you're anything personally like him, but this is a radical idea.
Yeah.
It's a very radical idea. Are they upset at you?
Have
they told you, hey, back down?
No, nobody's done that. Nobody's done that. It's actually they've been much nicer about it than I thought they would be. The people I think who are most upset about it are people who support Bernie Sanders because they say Bernie Sanders is talking about the same sort of stuff. And I like Bernie Sanders. I think he's been doing an incredible job rallying the Democratic base. But the thing is, I feel like I'm, the emperor is wearing no clothes guy, right? Because all of these people are talking about these incredible things they're going to do. But what we know is they can't do it. They can't do it. And when you, like Bernie Sanders, add to your list of 8 issues, by the way, we're going to deal with money in politics, you are never going to have the mandate to deal with money in politics when that's the way you approach it. I was, early on an advisor. I wrote him a memo, which they then leaked to Politico, where I basically said, look, you've got to make this issue number 1 if anything else in your list is going to be credible. You've got to say, I'm going to tackle this corruption first. I'm going to solve this problem first. And then it's plausible to talk about why we're going to get climate change legislation or deal with the banks or deal with the incredible inequality of wealth that we have in our society. But until you deal with the corrupt system, as Elizabeth Warren puts it, the rigged system, until you deal with the rigged system first, none of this other stuff is even possible.
All right, when we get back from commercial break, we'll talk about what you're actually going to change. What is the proposal in terms of changing all of this rigged system on This Week in Startups? Hey everybody, let me take a moment to thank our friends at Citrix GoToMeeting. I mean, gosh, think about all the time and money and hassle it takes to hold these meetings. My God, you're going down to the valley, up to San Francisco, the traffic, the cost, the flying places, and my recommendation is that you meet your clients and coworkers over Citrix's GoToMeeting. It is a smarter way to meet, and it has beautiful HD faces, amazing HD quality. I just did an all hands with my team from inside.com, and it was perfect. Everybody had crystal clear VoIP, or they were dialing in. And people were on different platforms. Some people were on their smartphones. Some people were on tablets. Some people were on desktop computers. And you know what? I have a real thing. I want everybody to have like a headset on. And some people forgot their headsets. And it still sounded really good. It's really the most professional meeting product on the market. It's very affordable. I've had it for many, many years. I think I'm close to a decade using GoToMeeting. And I want you to try it and sign up for GoToMeeting today. You'll get it free for 30 days. You have nothing to lose. So visit GoToMeeting.com. Click the Try It Free button, and if you do it now, your first meeting will be up and running in just minutes. And that's GoToMeeting, and your first 30 days are free. It's a fantastic product. You can also, it has a chat room in it, which is also a nice feature. I like to have somebody take notes and put it in the chat room. You can also record the audio from it in case you want to share that with everybody. And you know what? I do that as well. It's a fantastic product. Thank you, GoToMeeting. Let's get back to this amazing episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to This Week in Startups. Larry Lessig is on the program. LessigForPresident.com. Of course, you can follow him on the Twitter at Lessig, Lessig. He's announced on 8/11 he's going to take the presidency if he can. He's going to run for president if he can hit 1 million by Labor Day, which is September 7th, and over $400,000. So it looks like you're going to get this done. You got a lot of power. Speaking of having rich, powerful friends, you know a lot of rich, powerful internet people. Somebody's going to come along. Is there a major donor so far?
Well, you know, the donations to this are capped at $5,400. So so I can't get like $1 million check. I can only get $5,400 checks. So I got to get a bunch of checks. Now, so far we've had, you know, I think something like 4,000 different contributors of different size. But what we need is a lot more. We have to get to about 10,000 contributors. And if we get to 10,000, then I think we'll make it.
Would it be ethical to take the $1 million with somebody, which is the antithesis of what you're fighting against, in order to break the system?
I am not a believer in unilateral disarmament. I think we got to live by the rules in order to change the rules. So
you have to be a good example.
No, what I'm saying is I'll do whatever is legal right now in order to get into a place where we can change the system to make it into a more just system. So, you know, what the law says is I can't create a super PAC, or I can't encourage people to create a super PAC. So I'm going to obey the law, absolutely.
Right. So 5,400 is the limit for all presidential candidates.
Yeah.
Now, how do they get around that with these super PACs?
Well,
because I got to be honest with you, I'm a super neophyte to this because I'm so turned off by the whole political system for exactly the reason you have.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about Jeb Bush. So here's how Jeb Bush did it. Jeb Bush said, I'm not running for president. I'm not running for president. I'm not running for president. While he was not running for president, he was running a super PAC. He was raising money for a super PAC. And to show how virtuous he was, he said he would take no more than $1 million from anybody for his super PAC.
Yes.
So he
capped it at $1 million.
Yeah, capped it at $1 million. He raised about $100 million for his super PAC. Once he had raised $100 million for a super PAC, he then said, I'm resigning from the super PAC, and oh, by the way, I'm running for president. And the super PAC is going to support him. So he raised money for his super PAC, and then he turned around and he became a candidate for president that the super PAC was supporting. That makes the whole system a total joke, because the principle of the super PAC is it's supposed to be independent of a candidate. So, you know, a super PAC is supposed to be a organization that's raising money and spending money without coordinating with a political campaign. But when the very candidate is the guy who set up the super PAC, and then he turns around and runs as a candidate, this makes a total joke out of the separation.
So when they made the super PAC legislation, was that legislation?
No.
Or was it just an agreement?
No. What happened is the Supreme Court decided the case Citizens United, which is a case that said you could spend unlimited amounts of money if you were a corporation or a union, adding to the right that individuals had to spend unlimited amounts of money. And then another court, not the Supreme Court, said, well, if you can spend unlimited amounts of money, constitutionally, you should be allowed to give unlimited amounts of money. So that decision created the super PAC. So now people have a constitutional right to contribute unlimited amounts of money to these political groups called super PACs, as long as those political groups do not coordinate with the campaign.
Wait a second. But you just said he started and worked on it. That is the definition of coordination.
You would think.
No, wait a second. This is why I think so many young people.
Of course, you're free.
I can't understand. Wait a second. That's like saying, like, I started Microsoft, and but I'm not the founder, but I have all the shares.
Right. It's ridiculous.
It makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
Wouldn't the definition be like if you were involved in the super PAC in any of the last 5 years, that would be coordination?
You would think.
I mean, I don't know. I could look up the word coordination.
Yeah, and I think it's a dicey line, and he might actually. And there's some question whether it's going to be prosecuted. But the point is, the whole system is a joke now.
Right.
And what you see increasingly is people who don't even try to raise money for their own campaign. What they do is they try to help the super PAC raise $1 million contributions. So, have lots of candidates who are, raising maybe $1 million in their campaign, $2 million in their campaign, but they're going out and getting, millions of dollars given to the super PAC, who then ostensibly acts independently of the campaign.
If Obama goes to a lunch hosted by a super PAC and they raise $25,000 per seat, is that coordination? Isn't he involved in it?
Yeah, so the law is if Obama goes and speaks, or Obama's not a candidate anymore, but imagine,
but when he was.
If a candidate goes and speaks at a super PAC event, he's allowed to do that. He's supposed to say, all I can do is try to get you to give $5,400 to the super PAC. That's the most I can ask you to do.
Right.
But of course, everybody knows people are there being asked to give $1 million to the super PAC, right? So, and that's in fact what they do. So candidates help raise money for a super PAC. The place where you're not allowed to coordinate is the spending of the money. Okay, but here's the reality. These campaign experts, they figure out how to spend the money based on the polling information. Everybody's reading the same polls. So everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do without even talking to each other, because they can read the data and figure out how to respond to the data without ever coordinating.
There's an algorithm that could be written
Absolutely.
on how to maximize your super PAC. Somebody must have written the algorithm.
I'm sure they have. And they secret tweets out there to signal and coordinate.
This
I mean, it's
is-
a total joke.
And there is evidence of this because you see someone like Hillary, who was anti-gay marriage, then became pro-gay marriage. Obama was anti-gay marriage, but
Pro-civil union.
Civil union. And then one of his campaign managers came out and said, yeah, no, he just did that to raise the money and whatever. And then he always was going to flip. And he had actually told me, this guy wrote in his book that he told me he was going to flip it. So basically what you have is candidates lying to get into office, lying to get the money to get into office. That's what's happening.
Yeah, they're leaning to the green
Leading to the green. They're outright lying about their positions. Obama was pro-gay marriage. He lied about his position.
Maybe that's right.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, but that's the way the system is, because that's the only way you get elected, is making the funders happy. And what the funders say is, so the best example, there's a great piece by Krugman in the New York Times, where Krugman is talking about the fact that Republican candidates for president are now talking about a Social Security revision that is totally unpopular with the public and especially among Republicans. So he's like, well, why are they doing this? Why are they talking about changing Social Security in a way that nobody wants to vote for? And the reason is the funders like it. These 130 families who are funding half the campaigns. So they're fighting over how much they can talk about destroying Social Security just to get the money from the funders.
Right.
And once they get the money from the funders, then they can go and try to race back to the middle to get the votes from the people.
Okay, so how much of the will of the people is actually occurring, do you feel, today? Because when I was growing up in the 80s, I think we're pretty similar in age, I never expected the radical change in gay marriage and in, let's say, cannabis and decriminalization. I never thought that would ever happen in my lifetime or our lifetime. When we see the will of the people seems to be actually manifesting itself in some legislation, although it seems to have a delay of 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
Is that acceptable? Is that what we should expect from a democracy?
Well, there's an amazing study that was just done by these professors at Princeton, Martin Gillens and Ben Page. It's the largest empirical study of actual decisions by our government over the last 30 years ever done in the history of political science. And what they did is they related the actual decisions of our government to the attitudes of the economic elite, organized interest groups, and the average voter. And what they found with the economic elite is that the higher the percentage of the elite who supported something, the higher the probability was that it would in fact be enacted. So if you go from 0% to 100%, the probability of that happening went up. Same thing for organized interest groups. If you go from 0 to 100%, the probability of what they supported being enacted goes up. When you look at the average voter, it's a flat line, which means the average voter's view has no consequence for the probability of something being passed. If 0% of the average voter supports something or 100%, it doesn't change the probability of that thing actually being enacted. So the average voter, statistically, has no impact on what, in fact, our government does. The only thing that has an explainable impact is what the elite want or what organized interest groups want.
Do you think that what we saw in Operation Wall Street when the market came apart was, in fact, because it was a number of different issues melded into one, do you think that was a reaction to people feeling this very statistic that you're pointing out from the Princeton study, that we don't have an impact, our vote doesn't count anymore?
Yeah. And I think that they think that, and I think that they're right about that. I think when you see a system where politicians are obsessed with what their funders care about, and their funders aren't us, you see a system where the politicians are not doing what we want them to do. And that is the fundamental problem we've got to find a way to fix. Now, normal politicians, kind of just accept it and they go on with it and they say, well, this is just the system. But, at some point, those of us who are not politicians have got to stand up and say, enough, this is outrageous.
Yeah.
And especially for kids, people my age, you're much younger than I am, but people my age, 50
I'm 44.
something.
What are you, 50?
I'm 54. So we're 10 years apart.
Okay, yeah. You were born 1960, I was born 1960.
61.
Okay.
People my age, we talk about climate change, but climate change is never going to affect me. I'll be long gone before Bangladesh is underwater, right? We talk about the problems of Social Security. I'm going to have Social Security, right? We talk about the problems of the debt of the United States. The debt is us borrowing from our children, right? All of these big problems are problems that our kids are going to suffer, not us. But we've created a system where we can't solve any of these problems. We can't solve any of these problems because the people with the money like it the way it is, right? So deal with climate change, why would we pay to deal with climate change? Like that makes no sense at all.
Kick that ball down the road.
Yeah, kick the ball down the road. The debt, thank you, children. Thank you for giving us the money we need to do, to bail out the banks or whatever else we wanted to do with that money. All of these problems are problems we've got to find a way to address, but we will never address them until we fix this corrupted system.
So what should the system look like? We have this $5,400 level. We have these super PACs, which seem to be just the super PACs to me seem like the ultimate manifestation of the broken system and just evil incarnate.
Yeah. So the first step is to deal with what we could do without constitutional amendment, because a constitutional amendment is really hard. Okay. So let's deal with what we could do through a statute. So that's change the way elections are funded. Create like a voucher system or a small dollar matching system like New York City has for city offices, so that instead of being funded by a tiny number, campaigns are funded by millions, so the politicians are focused on what their voters care about, not focused on what their funders. We could do that tomorrow. A single statute could bring that about. Supreme Court would not strike it down. It's perfectly constitutional.
Right. And New York does this. I grew up in New York. I remember this. You raised a certain amount of money on your own, and they matched it?
They match it 6-to-1.
6-to-1.
John Sarbanes' bill would match it up to 9-to-1. He also has a voucher proposal, but his bill is the most aggressive for trying to find a way to have small dollar funding of elections rather than big.
And when you do this matching fund, which seems completely logical to me, although you might as like a libertarian or say, well, why would I pay my taxes for that? It's a de minimis amount of money in the grand scheme of budgets of government. But it basically gets the politician off of the fundraising trail at a certain point and gets them engaging with their voters, constituents, and the voters.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the libertarian concern is...
Does it work in New York?
Yeah, it works in New York. It works in Connecticut. It works in Maine. These are all states that have these kinds of small dollar systems. I get the libertarians' concern. Yeah. Although let's remember, we've just spent $1 trillion to deal with democracy in Iraq, right? So $1 trillion.
How'd that work out for us?
Yeah, it didn't work so well. And if you think about, like, if the $50 voucher, if you had a $50 voucher, that would be $7 billion every election cycle. So $3.5 billion a year. Okay, so that sounds like a lot of money.
Wait. Oh yeah, every 2 years, right.
Yeah, okay. That sounds like a lot of money, but the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, estimates the amount of corporate welfare every year. So corporate welfare means special deals corporations get to have subsidies or special protections because of their special connections inside of government. Cato says corporate welfare every year is $100 billion.
Right.
So if you could reduce corporate welfare by 5%,
we get the difference.
You get
1.5 billion in profits.
Yeah, that's right. We get profits of 1.5 just by reducing it by 5%. So the point is, we would have to invest something, but if it liberated our Congress, so they would be free to lead rather than just follow their funders, it would totally be worth it.
All right. When we get back from this final commercial break, I want to talk a little bit more about if you think you could actually win. When we get back on This Week in Startups. Listen, I could talk to you all day about Squarespace. I love this product. All of our sites are built on Squarespace. Why? Because I can just say, hey, Bryce, hey, Ashley, hey, Jackie, just change this on the Squarespace site. Hey, can we get this up on the Launch Festival site? Hey, can we get this up on the Launch Mobile site? Hey, on the Scale Conference, on this, on that. It instantly gets done. It's easy to use. Squarespace makes beautiful websites so simply. They have all these great design templates. You pick one, and all of a sudden, it looks like you spent $250,000 on your website. Literally, these designers are, a lot of designers are very upset. A lot of web shops are very upset about Squarespace. I've seen this many times where they would normally spend, people would spend $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 on a website, and Squarespace does it for dollars a month, like $10 a month. It's unbelievably affordable, and everything, it starts at $8 a month, by the way. Everything is responsive. So when you pull it up on your iPad or your phone, you have to pinch and zoom to see the website. It all just works. And you're not at bent over a barrel by all these crazy developer freelancers who then disappear for months. They go, on a hike and they go bike across the United States while your website still isn't responsive or still isn't working. You need to have a professional group behind your website, and that is Squarespace. They also support e-commerce now, and they just keep adding features. Like they have a calendar feature that's really good right now. And there's all these little plugins and little, craftsmanship that make the site look so good. I love the product. You can start your free trial today with no credit card required. And when you decide to sign up for Squarespace, please use the offer code TWiST to get 10% off your first purchase. Squarespace, build it beautiful. Build it beautiful. Please, please. There's a lot of ugly stuff going on in the world. A lot of ugly websites. Just use Squarespace and make the world beautiful. That's not their tagline. But I love beautiful websites. When I see a beautiful website for a conference, I buy a ticket. When I see a beautiful website for a product, I buy the product. When I see a beautiful website for a service or a startup, I want to meet with them. Go to squarespace.com and have a great, beautiful website. It's trusted by millions of people, including some of the most respected brands of the world. Their technology is state-of-the-art, secure, easy to use, scalable. You don't need to have a developer do it. I could talk for days. Thank you, Squarespace, for being one of my longest-running sponsors for This Week in Startups. I truly appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Okay, let's get back to the program. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. Our guest, Larry Lessig, is a brilliant guy. He's a law professor, Harvard, et cetera, Creative Commons. You've done a lot of awesome stuff. What are some of the big things you're notable for? The big legal cases you worked on, et cetera?
Well, I was the one who tried to challenge the Copyright Term Extension Act in the Supreme Court.
Did you win that or you lost that?
No, we lost that. But
so
we
basically,
lost the battle, but we won the war because that was part of what began this really incredibly important political, social movement to try to force change in the way copyright policy has happened. And I think the ultimate victory in that was the SOPA-PIPA fight, which was a huge political manifestation of this frustration with the way copyright law was not working.
Right. And Mickey Mouse keeps getting extended. Yeah. How long does Disney get to keep the old Mickey Mouse stuff?
Right now, 95 years.
95 years after the life of the owner, the creator dies?
For corporate work, it's just 95 years.
95 years.
For an individual, it's the life of the author plus 70.
Okay.
But Mickey Mouse is about to come up again, so there's beginning to be a conversation about whether they should extend the copyright term again.
Wow.
So I think that'll be very hard for them this time because I think the political movement has grown to be able to resist it.
If they lose Mickey Mouse, that means I could release a DVD or sell a T-shirt with the original Mickey Mouse on it, but not the new one?
The original, not the new one. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, what's so ridiculous about that fight is it's not really about Mickey Mouse. It's about the 98% of other old work that nobody has any access to because we didn't even know who the owners are and nobody can restore it or do anything with it because if they do and then an owner shows up, they're liable for huge copyright damages. So that whole fight was really about making it so that we could preserve a culture that we knew was not going to be made available. And they were so extreme in that fight that they wouldn't even think about ways to distinguish between Mickey Mouse and the rest of this culture. So we made a proposal. It said 50 years after something was copyrighted, you would have to pay $1. And if you paid $1, you could continue to get the benefit of copyright. If you didn't, then it would fall into the public domain. $1. And
just so you had to opt in again.
You had to opt in.
Re-opt, double opt in.
Double opt in, $1 is nothing. The Motion Picture Association, Jack Valenti, opposed it. Yeah, he's a good friend. But he opposed it. And the argument they made, I swear to God, this is the argument, it would be a burden on poor copyright owners who couldn't afford the $1. The poor copyright owners whose copyright was still valuable, they couldn't afford the $1 to continue the value.
The logic was, Jack was always known as being the rabid pit bull of he'll defend the movie. He was a great character, wasn't he?
He was amazing, and he was brilliant. He was a
smart cat.
He was a really smart guy. Yeah.
But now you go do a Google book search. You go do a Google magazine search. They indexed all this stuff. They put all that expense. And now sometimes you load the page and it says, we can't figure out who the owner of this is.
Right.
It's undetermined. Right. Therefore, we can't show it to you.
Right.
But I could go to the library and see it.
It's ridiculous. It's a copyright system that was written for the analog world.
Right.
It doesn't make sense in the digital world. And so that was what we were arguing. How do we update it to make it so it makes sense?
What were some of the other big ones you worked on? And do you have a private practice, by the way, or do you just do all this stuff for the good of society?
No,
What
these
makes
are all
you
pro bono cases. I do.
Do you take cases that are non-pro bono, or your whole life is just doing pro bono things to make society better?
As much as I could, and I can, and I'm inspired by that by my friend Aaron Swartz, who did that for his whole short life.
I met Aaron. It was a real tragedy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The kid was so creative. I remember seeing him at the E-Tech conferences. He was hanging out with 17 years old, 18 years old. Tell everybody, like, what was the point of them coming down so hard on them? What was their rationale for taking a sensitive, introverted 20-year-old kid at the time, I think, or 19 or 20, who downloaded educational papers and threatening him with being in jail for, I think, decades? What was their motivation, do you think?
I think they just thought they needed to be incredibly harsh to create the incentive for others not to do what Aaron was doing. And what was so striking about it is the more they learned about Aaron. I understand that when they initially discovered the infringement, they would be, concerned, what's this about? Is this a big criminal conspiracy? Is it tied to Russia? Like, what is this about? Is this guy trying to steal and make money? I understand the reaction.
Espionage.
Right.
Yeah.
But the more they learned about it, the more they learned that this is just this is a kid who has done nothing in his life except try to make the world a better place. He's not trying to profit from any of this. Even though they learned this about him, they never backed down in the harshness of what they were demanding. They continued to be as harsh as they possibly could, and threatening him all the way to the very end. He spent, like $1 million of his savings just getting to the point so we could start his trial.
Were you going to represent him?
No, I was not representing him in that. I was trying to be a friend, but I wasn't representing him.
And has MIT, which seemed to full bore support this prosecution of somebody who literally put a hard drive in a server closet to download a bunch of academic papers, and how much blood is on the hands of MIT? Because it seemed to me like these guys and gals over there, they were full on supporting this crazy prosecutor who couldn't see the forest through the trees.
I think the truth is MIT is filled with a bunch of geeks who have an irrational faith in the legal system. From a lawyer's perspective, if you know somebody's in the criminal justice system in America, you work like hell to get that person out, because the criminal justice system is a random machine that will chew up people for no good reason just because it's such an incredibly inefficient system. But if you're a geek, outside, you kind of have, kind of an implicit respect for a system. You kind of think it's got to figure it out.
Rules.
Yeah, and I would talk to people at MIT, like there was one most amazing thing about it was the core charge against Aaron was that he had accessed the network without authorization. Well, MIT had an open access network policy, which basically meant if you were on the property, you had authorization to use the network.
Right.
And there's this exchange inside of MIT where they're like, shouldn't we tell the prosecutor about this? Because, it's
material.
And the response was, no, that's for them to work out. That's for them to figure all that out.
Very.
And that was because they kind of believed they would work it out, they'd figure it out, and everything would be okay. Like it would be a happy ending. But there is no happy ending in the criminal justice system. It's an incredibly bad system right now.
Right.
It's got the wrong incentives built in it. Not always. I think most prosecutors are decent, people who are turning down lots of money to work for the government. These are decent people, but sometimes it just gets nuts, and when it does, these kinds of tragedies
They seem particularly vindictive when it comes to computer hackers.
Yeah.
Why is that?
They don't understand it. They just don't understand it, and it scares them. And some hackers are really bad, right? I mean,
stealing credit cards, identity.
Yeah, right. It's terrible, and I'm all for being as aggressive as you can against people who are hurting other people, right? But the idea that every time somebody crosses the line on the computer, it's hurting other people is just crazy. It's just wildly beyond what makes sense, and I think that's what ultimately took over in that case. Anyway, that's far from what I'm doing right now.
I think it's, I always find you a very interesting character, Larry, because there seems to be very few people in this world, especially in the industry that we run in, the technology industry, you're part of it, who focus on, just the overall good of humanity. I put you in that bucket of people, John Perry Barlow, yourself, who are just thinking about the big picture constantly. It really is what the technology industry was built off of, which was, didn't we all think that this technology, especially the internet, would wind up net, at the end of the day, at the end of the road, it would make things a little bit better for humanity? Has it? Do you feel it's a net win now? Because we were so convinced at the start of the web, 92, 93, 94, that this was going to be the game changer. It's turned into a commercial machine with privacy and Google kind of just, and the NSA on top of that, and all these technology companies being in cahoots with them. It's kind of heartbreaking in a way for a guy like you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the first book I wrote was called Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. And the argument of the book was, the internet protects privacy, protects freedom of speech, but that's just a function of its architecture. And the architecture could change. And indeed, government and business both want the architecture to change so that they can take away privacy and they can take away the freedom of speak. And when I wrote that book, people are like, oh my God, that's so naive. Like, why would the government ever conspire with business to do it? And why would business ever conspire with it? It'll never happen. I mean, David Pogue wrote a review of my book where he said, this Soviet-style surveillance, there's no evidence this would ever happen. It's completely, Cassandra liked to sort of talk about this. And, Cassandra was right? Yeah. That was the story of Cassandra. She was right. And unfortunately, that's what in fact happened. Now, I think it's more complicated than that, though, because I think the internet is both the best it could possibly be and the worst it could possibly be at the same time, right? It's the best it could possibly be because it still is an infrastructure that allows incredible self-organization outside of the control of anybody. It's the potential, I think, that we need to do to leverage to be able to solve the problem I'm working on right now, this corruption of this government. So I think the internet is our savior, but at the same time, it is an incredible infrastructure of surveillance that has been compromised by our governments with the complicity of the businesses who supply the infrastructure of this network, all in the name of protecting us from terrorism. I mean, so it is the thing Snowden warns us about, and it's also the thing that makes revolution possible at the same time.
How will history look at Snowden and those leaks, do you think?
I think Snowden will be looked at as a hero of America. And I hope the next president pardons Snowden.
Really?
I hope this president pardons Snowden. Absolutely.
What about Chelsea Manning? I mean, those documents they leaked, listen, none of us were, in hindsight, I don't think any American is for those wars.
No, that's right. Yeah.
But I don't know that many Americans are for leaking information about confidential sources. Where does Lessig sit on that one? Because that's a complicated one, isn't it?
It's more complicated. I mean, I think what's interesting about Snowden is, he's a super smart guy who was very careful about the sort of stuff that he would put out. And he was very keen not to risk the lives of anybody that was involved. And he only did it because he believed there was no other way to get attention to this. He watched government officials lying about what was happening. He tried to go to Congress. They wouldn't listen. There was no way to go to the courts. They were a closed, secret process. So this was his only option. And so I think that kind of careful and measured response was appropriate in this case. And I'm sure that after we get over this crazy period, people look back on this and say that this was the act of a patriot because look at his sacrifice. He's living in Russia. Okay, he has a great girlfriend in Russia. I get that, but the point is,
but he's also with Putin, who could at any point in time whack him. I mean, who knows what could happen?
I mean, Putin's it's a nightmare, right? So,
but what about Chelsea Manning? Because in this case, this seems like a person, and I also want to know what you think of Julian Assange, because these seem like, a really bad combination of individuals to me to be collaborating on something that really was not executed well. If Snowden was executed deftly, how would you describe what they did?
Not as well. I mean, I think Assange has not been as careful. Wasn't as concerned to be as careful. He's
a bit of an anarchist, I think.
Yeah, and you could see that in his writings. I mean, you study him, and this is just the kind of way he thought about
just everything comes out, and let the chips fall where they may. Whether it's a good person who is an informant against a dictator,
right? Exactly right.
Who cares?
Yeah.
And then I think poor Chelsea Manning was just somebody who was obviously going through something very hard in their lives. Perhaps being a transgender individual could have contributed to this. She was probably dealing with a lot of heavy stuff and the weight of watching this war that was
I don't think you need to invoke the transgender to sort of imagine a soldier in the middle of this war recognizing what Chelsea Manning recognized and thinking, this is just crazy. This is crazy. And what is my obligation?
Yeah, that's enough. That's fair.
Yeah, what's my obligation as a citizen in a context where I see this kind of craziness happen?
But then you have Assange, who's probably a bit of a Svengali, saying this is the right way to do it. That's what I think. I don't know.
I agree with you.
But I mean, people who do go through those transitions, it is challenging for them too. That is a burden. But maybe you're right. Maybe just independently enough, watching people get murdered on camera over and over again who didn't deserve to be.
It's a very complicated world, isn't it?
It's complicated or it's simple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what we have done through these wars is we've produced 2 or 3 generations of humans who have nothing in their head except how to exterminate Americans. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I grew up, our enemies were the Soviets and the communists. But I, as a kid, went to Soviet Union. Like when I was 19, went to the Soviet Union, went to East Europe. People loved us, right? It's like, I mean, we
were the gold standard.
Yeah, we were the enemy, but nobody hated us. But if
they wanted to be us secretly.
They wanted to be us. But if my kid, my kids are pretty young now, but when my kids are like 19, do I want them going into the Middle East or into Iraq or into Iran? No. Why? Because I know those people think your people killed my father, my grandfather. And
tortured them too.
Yeah, drones, right, torture. I mean, the outrage. So I think we lost our mind after 9/11. And the problem is, we all have this experience of going out and getting drunk and waking up the next morning saying, oh my God, what did I do? Oh, geez, I'm so sorry. And you go around, you apologize to all the people. You
make amends.
You make amends. But we as a nation lost our mind. And we don't seem to have it within our capacity to say, look, we made some mistakes. We went too far.
Yeah.
And it's understandable why we went too far. I mean, I had friends who were very close to people who lost their lives in 9/11.
Yeah.
And so I'm not minimizing, and I'm not saying it's not explainable, but we ought to have the capacity to kind of look back and say, okay, I see why we were crazy, but we were crazy, and we've got to come back to the America that doesn't believe in torture, come back to the America that doesn't believe in perpetual surveillance, come back to the America that we try to tell the rest of the world we are. We've got to be that nation that we tell the world we want to be.
Yeah, we were supposed to be the standard by which other people could take note and say, hey, this is aspirational. They don't believe in torturing people. Eleanor Roosevelt, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, we wrote this
Roosevelt.
stuff.
What about McCain? John McCain. This is not a partisan thing, right?
Yeah.
This is who we are. We are not a nation that tortures.
Right.
And people who justify that...
Unjustifiable.
Yeah, it's unjustifiable. I mean, they're wrong about whether it's effective or not, but even if it were effective, it's still just wrong. And we should not be engaging in behavior that we can't look at our children and say, are you proud of us for doing this? Because our children are going to look at us and say, who the hell were you? Who were these monsters?
Right.
What were they doing?
Waterboarding people? I mean, our waterboarding, when you see what ISIS is doing, the sadistic, insane stuff they're doing on video is, I think, a magnification of the sadistic, insane stuff we did in torturing people in Abu Ghraib. If you took the Abu Ghraib photos, Abu Ghraib, of people with dogs and electricity on their genitals and being tortured and being stacked naked, and you look at that sick, sadistic moment in our history that we did as Americans did that. And then you look at these guys in ISIS cutting people's heads off, drowning them, lighting them on fire. It's just it's slightly to the right in terms of deviance and sadistic.
Well, they've got to up the ante. So when we have such a high ante, they've got to make something more, right? And so, it's all completely understandable, and it would have been predictable, and people did predict it, but we were in a crazy moment. We couldn't listen to them.
It's a failure of leadership, isn't it? I mean, Bush and Cheney, those guys just did not have the moral compass to say no.
Yeah, and again, maybe originally anybody would have done the same thing. But the question is, at what point do you stop and just say, whoa, wait, what's happened here? How do we get back to where we are as a people, where right and wrong are something that we believe and behave with?
I got to tell you something, Larry. I'm dead serious here. You may not be a one-issue president. I think a lot of what you say makes so much sense, and your track record of fighting for what's right, I think you have a very pure heart when you come to this. I think that you care about doing what's right as an American. You're one of the most American people I've ever met. You really are the definition of it. I wish if you go in, you stay in. I would rather you stay for a couple of years, because you know what? Your logical thinking and your moral compass is so strong.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but here's the fact. If I don't go in with one issue, I will never have the mandate to win. Nobody have a mandate to win. So I need to go on one issue.
Right.
And I need to get to that place where I can go in. So, we got to hit this target for funding. We got to spread the word so I'm in the debates.
Yeah.
So the consolation prize of all of this is to at least be in the debates, where every time an issue comes around, I can show how the issue is tied to this.
God, I cannot wait for you to be in that debates. Everybody who's listening right now, please go to LessigForPresident.com. if you, whatever you make per hour, times it by 10 or 20 and just give a donation. So if you make $50 an hour as the developer or whatever, give 500. If you make $100 an hour as a CEO, give 1,000. That's what I'm going to do when I get home. I'm going to donate.
Fantastic.
And I hope that everybody who's listening donates for Lessig for President, because just having you and your intellectual firepower, I've always been like a fan of your work and your intellectual prowess, and knowing that you have the right rudder, like you're going on the right path, and that you're smart. And and you're a lawyer, like it's great that you exist. You're like a secret weapon for us. Of like, you're going to have this great moment in the debate where these guys are all going to be talking at this very low level, and you're going to just break it down for people. In the same way Trump has totally disrupted them and said, hey, listen, we're losing around the world, and it's true, he's pandering to a lot of things, but there are some things he's talking about that is actually taking people out of the discussion. You're going to take people out of this reality distortion field, that this is actually some fair system. It's going to be like breaking the matrix. You on stage is going to be like people saying, here's the red and blue pill. It's going to be so effing awesome. I can't wait for that moment.
We got to get to the stage.
You're going to get there. I'm guaranteeing it. People ask on the Twitter and everything. People are watching and really enjoying the conversation. And they just, how can we help? How can we help? It's very simple. Everybody's just got to go there. If you can give $10, give $100. Listen, the law of small numbers says that this is, small amounts, but a large number of people. You've got a large audience. We all have large audiences on the Twitter and on the Facebook. Everybody go to LessigForPresident.com and please donate, because it matters. And I love this idea of you in the debates. And listen, you said you're not a young guy. You're only 54. You could do this. This could be your legacy. I mean, think about it. If you become like the same way Ross Perot took on debt, if you take this issue on and then you can be part of 2 or 3 election cycles, my God, I think just the same way you upended copyright, you have the track record. The Walt Disney Company had to deal with Larry Lessig. Now, all these people, the super PACs, they are going to be so tweaked. I love it. You're going to tweet the hell out of them. It's going to be great.
Only with your support, Jason.
Everybody who's trust me, a lot of people listen to the show and they take action, and we're going to get a lot of people to do this. We're going to get let's try to get 100K in the kitty in the next 24 hours or something. It's going to be super easy. There's a lot of rich people here. 5 dimes is nothing for a lot of the people watching the show. I'm going to put 5 dimes up. Everybody, 20 people, 5 dimes. We get them 10% closer. All right, listen. Amazing. Oh, hey, you had some thoughts on the H-1B visa stuff we were talking about the other day, or I was talking about it. What do you think? Is there a little bit of abuse in that system? Or what do you think of my idea for auctioning them off, maybe?
I like the idea of auctioning off.
A little bit fairer?
Yeah, I mean, because I actually am a big supporter of immigration in America.
Sure.
I think we're ridiculous in the way we exclude people and in the way in which we make the hardest working Americans feel like second-class people because we don't make them citizens. Like, immigrants in the United States work incredibly hard, and we ought to be embracing that energy and that life in America.
Right.
And we ought to be making it easier for people to come into the United States. And so this is a policy. Obviously Bernie Sanders isn't as excited about immigrants and immigrants in the United States, but I absolutely am a strong
because
supporter.
they stole our jobs.
They stole our jobs. And I just don't know the moral ground on which America, a nation of immigrants, all of a sudden stops and says, okay, now we're drawing the line. Right?
Yeah.
I agree. You ought to, be here and pay your taxes and work hard. But the immigrants I know, including my wife, who was an immigrant, now she's an American. These are people who love America ever so much as we do, and we ought to include them, embrace them as Americans.
I love the idea of we just take all these people who have been here working for decades and who don't have citizenship. Can you imagine what an amazing moment will be when 10 or 20 million of them are officially citizens? Can you imagine how much joy and how much loyalty they'll have to this country?
Gosh. I mean,
the loyalty will be incredible if they're not living under fear.
Yeah. Those people are the strongest Americans. I mean, they're the most pro-American of Americans, right? Because they can compare it to their old country where they didn't have a rule of law, or they didn't have the opportunity for economic, or they had
freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
All the things that are great about us, they appreciate more than even we do, right? So absolutely, I think these people are Americans. We ought to just make them American citizens.
All right, question from the audience: is Hillary Clinton trustworthy? What do you think of all this stuff with her email and stuff like that? It's a little bit of a out of left field kind of question, but
it's a fair question. I think the biggest problem that she has is establishing trustworthiness and the sense in which she knows and lives up to right versus wrong. Now, I have enormous respect for her, but when you look at the questions that I've been talking about, like, do you appreciate the problem with this corruption of influence? She hasn't done enough to demonstrate she actually gets it. Bill Clinton, for example, said that if Hillary is president, he would no longer give speeches where he takes $1 million checks to give the speeches. And it's like, why, Bill? Because whatever the answer to that question is, why wasn't it true when she was Secretary of State or a senator, right? And the answer is, it should have been true then too. But I just think there's a kind of blindness that they've got to demonstrate they now get. If you look at Bill Clinton,
what did they do? $2 billion or $1 billion for something like that?
A huge amount for the foundation.
Yeah, the foundation was
he's earned unbelievable amounts of money given these kind of speeches. But if you look at him in the 1990s as president, this New Democrat, all of these things that he did, which now he looks at and he says he regrets. They were all mistakes.
Right.
Basically, every compromise he made with Republicans, he now regrets. And so, they've had a long history, and they had a long history, in the 1990s, it was the period where the Democrats were loving this fundraising, all this money, as much Wall Street money as they could get.
Right.
Now the question is, have they changed on this issue too? And if they, I'm willing to believe her if she steps up and says, here's what we've got to do. We've got to change the way elections are funded.
Right.
We've got to make it so people can believe that their government cares about them, not about their funders. And I'm going to be the most aggressive anti-corruption equality president there could be. Better than Lessig. I'll outdo Lessig. That's what she needs to do.
Yeah, the matching dollars thing is so brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, who's on this final question here? Because you got to get going. You got a lot going on running for president. Be on This Week in Startups. Who is on your short list for VP? Do you have any ideas there?
Again, I think the Democratic Party has got to decide it. But if I got to pick, I would pick somebody who is incredible. If it's an insider, somebody who's energized the base. Bernie's done that. Elizabeth Warren has done that. If it's somebody on the outside, I would love, obviously, this is complicated by her own personal loss, but somebody like Sheryl Sandberg would just be amazing.
You know what? I think she's destined for it.
Eventually, absolutely.
Yeah. But she denies it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? You don't write the book and get that good at speaking.
That's right.
And
amazing.
It's so obvious to me she's going to run for office at some point. I can't wait till she does.
Good for us, because she would be an amazing leader.
Well, you know what? Talk about a moral compass. She has always had a very strong moral compass. She would never. It's one of the things. One of the counter arguments is, shouldn't these people who are elite, quote unquote elite, haven't they deserved some sort of station in life because of what they've done, that maybe they should have more influence? I know that sounds crazy, but that people do say that crazy statement. That's not my position, but aren't these people, haven't they, because of the fact that they've made a ton of money and they've distinguished themselves in society, don't they deserve a little bit more say?
Well, if they were devoting themselves to making America a better place,
right?
I would love the kind of talent of a Bill Gates or Sheryl. Focused on making America a better place. The problem is when they use their leverage or their power to make their own companies a richer place.
Right.
And that's the big disconnect, right?
Yeah.
Because if their business is to make their business better by crony connections to a corrupt government, that's what causes the corruption and inequality of our system right now. But if they could devote their talents to making America a better place, we need them.
It does seem like at a certain point, you may have seen this as well, that when a person reaches a certain point of wealth, affluence, success, something trips and they just say, and for not all people, but many, I'm just going to give back. Maybe it's some sort of guilt or whatever about this tremendous wealth.
Look at Bill Gates.
Opportunity, but man, Bill Gates is going to be known for his philanthropy, not Windows.
Yeah, he'd be known for ending polio, eradicating polio. That will be Bill Gates.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, and Warren Buffett. I think a lot of these people have come to recognize that there's, when you've got $50 billion, there's nothing this could possibly do for you.
Impossible.
Why not, find a way to give it back? And these people, I think, are, inspirations. They're very, very, very important.
You're not anti-capitalism. You're pro-capitalism.
Absolutely.
Just so people are clear, you're not
totally pro-capitalism. Yes. I am anti-crony capitalism.
Right.
I am anti-corrupted capitalism. I am anti a system where, there's a great libertarian, Luigi Zingales. He's a professor at University of Chicago Business School. Luigi Zingales. He's an Italian immigrant to America. He wrote this book with a colleague called "Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists." And his whole point was, what happens when you're a capitalist is, when you start out, you use the competitive system to succeed. And then when you succeed, you use your wealth to corrupt the competitive system to protect yourself, right?
Right.
And so his whole point is we've got to make sure that they can't leverage their success in the marketplace into a protection of themselves in the marketplace. And that's exactly right. And so what's great about Silicon Valley is it's still young. It's still in the place where it's just trying to figure out, how do we make a lot of money by giving people what they want? And that's exactly what we want capitalists to do. But the problem is, as you get older in the capitalist arc, then you become like AT&T, where it's like, how do I suck up to the government? Or how do I send my lobbyists into the government to make sure the government gives us special protections? Or, makes it easier for us to create inequality, through overturning network neutrality and things like that. So the point is, we got to have a capitalism that's focused on what capitalism does good, which is competing and producing great. And of course, that's not all. We've got to also have a society that makes sure that we've got the basic conditions of equality so people can participate. But I am not against the capitalist system with that society around it.
You optimistic, generally speaking, for humanity? Or do you sit at bed at night and go, God, chances are this whole thing's going to just come apart?
If we don't fix this problem, we are, am I allowed to use a bad word on this?
Sure you can.
We are fucked.
Yeah.
Okay, if we don't fix it. But I'm actually more optimistic than I've ever been that we can fix it. Because I think we are at a point where people are so frustrated.
Yes.
And there's still an opportunity to do something about it. And if we can just find the mechanism to leverage that, we could actually do something about it. And if we do something about it, we got to do more than just rage and fury about the system. We got to figure a way to fix it, because if we fix it, we could be doing amazing things again, right? We could actually think about, actually achieve incredible ability again. If we just get rid of, this corrupted system in Washington. I mean, look at America. You're out here on the West Coast, you look at Silicon Valley. This is the best anywhere in the world for innovators.
Amazing.
You look at Hollywood, the creativity. I love those terrible blockbuster movies. I love them. I love what Hollywood produces. You look at Nashville, the music that comes out. You look at the breadbasket of America, the creativity and all of America is amazing. The rest of the world looks at us and says, this is incredible. And then you look at Washington, D.C., and it's like, oh my gosh, this is such an embarrassment.
Yeah,
it is such an embarrassment. And our parents did not think that.
No.
In our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, they were proud to look at our government and say,
JFK.
Now, of course, they were blind to certain things like, the inequality of racism that was built into okay, but the point is, this was a system that wasn't so deeply corrupted that you could actually talk about how this is the sort of system the rest of the world should emulate. There is no country in the world that looks at our government now and says, this is what we want to do.
That's the model, right? No, now they're looking to Norway, right?
Exactly. All these
the big concept is to get to Norway, get to some country where what the people want is what eventually happens in government.
And what I was at an event last weekend, and one of my friends sort of stood up and said, I've just finally come to accept the idea that America's in decline.
Wow.
And I just hope it doesn't decline so fast, but I've just accepted it. And I felt this kind of sick feeling in my stomach, and I had to stand up and no, that is not acceptable.
Yeah.
It is not acceptable.
I don't believe it.
We are not going to accept the idea we're in decline. I'm not going to give that to my kids, and we've got to fight like hell to make sure that's not who we are.
That's it, everybody. That's the close right there. Larry Lessig for president. He's going to solve a lot of these problems around corruption. He's going to hand over the reins to somebody who he believes is more qualified. I'll tell you something. I think we would do really well to have a Larry Lessig and Sheryl Sandberg ticket. We might need to switch those. She might be a better president than you. Maybe you be the vice president.
No, I will be president for a day and then give it to Sheryl. She could be president for the rest of the time.
What a dream.
That's the point. That's my idea.
She is so good at what she does.
Everything.
Can you imagine Sheryl Sandberg as our president? Yeah. That would be a dream for this country. God. And you know what? I feel like guys like you coming in and like actually putting it on the line, I have to say I commend you, because you know what? I look at all this stuff and I'm just like, paid $35,000 to go have lunch with Obama. It just makes me sick. Yeah. My friends email me. I mean, I'm not going to point out which friends or who or whatever, but I get these emails. Hey, come to hang out with Obama. Obama wants to meet you. This one wants to meet you. Hey, and then it's always like this form, and I got to fill it out and put 35 dimes. And you know what the thing is? I got the 35 dimes now. I made a bunch of money, and I don't want to do it. I feel like I shouldn't do it. It feels dirty to me. And the people are like, that's the system. I'm like, I don't want to be part of that. So there's a bunch of people out there who are opting out because of this. I'm opted out because I don't want to be part of corruption.
Yeah. So you got to opt into fixing it.
I am. I'm opting into Larry Lessig. Everybody go to LessigforPresident.com, and we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. Bye-bye.